Should I change my slides too? I can do that. You had it up, so I already saw it. All right, here. All right. That is part C. Okay. Yes, I can absolutely admit these people.
Admit all.
There we go. Hopefully they're still coming in. Okay. So I'm gonna move. There we go. All right, so my name is Jamie Rhodes. I am a senior attorney at the Conservation Law Foundation. I've been, honestly, oddly enough, I've only been working there for 8 months, but it feels like I've worked there my entire life. That's a good thing in the sense of, I feel like I've been doing this work that long, and it's also a weird thing because maybe those days just feel like they last forever in their own ways. So a primary piece of my work is in fact representing Conservation Law Foundation at the Public Utilities Commission, primarily around electricity rates and electricity related issues. I have a colleague, James Crowley, that does a lot of our natural gas work and representation there. And so today when talking about, I'm just going to give it so I can see what so there, okay. I was thinking through like how to, because as was said before, if I just talk about the Public Utilities Commission, it will be extremely dull. Now, I'm not saying the way that I'm going to do this will be that much more exciting because the commission is what it is. But what I decided to do was kind of like use our electricity bill as a way to walk through the type of decisions that the Public Utilities Commission makes, how it's made them, and also how it's changing, both in the sense of what the legislation that Emily will be talking about in a minute, but also it's starting to change the way that it approaches rates to begin with. So with that, I know we have Q&A at the end, but there's things that you want to clarify as we're going through, please raise a hand, get my attention. It's the only way to kind of hopefully make this make sense. So that's my notes here. Great. Okay. So first, as I said, we're going to start off with what we see on our bill. But I also say this knowing that while this is your bill has been, as of today, our bills no longer look like this. So Rhode Island Energy, in case anybody hasn't noticed, rolled out their new website today. It includes a whole new billing system for it. The bill is going to look different. I have not seen what their new bill looks like, except for some draft versions, a couple ideas that have been floated around. So I don't actually know what the new bill is going to look like. So I'm going to have to use the old bill for this, but the information is what I'm kind of going for and not so much for what it actually looks like. That being said, I'm curious as to how they're going to present this information in the future, because how you present this information is critical. So just a quick note within this is like within your electricity bill, there's two primary sections. There's the delivery services here at the top, and there's the supply services at the bottom. The delivery services is how do you get electricity from point A to point B, point A being where it was created and point B being where it's used. And then the supply services are actually paying for the electricity itself, paying for each one of those electrons. It's broken, it's got two forms. We pay our bill in two forms. There's fixed charge and there's variable charges. I'm laying crumbs now because all these things are going to come back later. I'm trying to lay a good groundwork here. So fixed charge, for example, is your customer charge, $6. That is what it is. Every bill, fixed rate, $6, no matter what. That's the baseline. It doesn't matter how much electricity you use. It could be zero, or it could be a lot. There's still a fixed charge. Then there's the variable charges. And here you can see distribution, energy efficiency, renewable energy, transmission, and even the energy charge at the bottom. Those are variable, as in the other way that we often use the term is volumetric. So the more of it you use, the more that you pay. It has a rate, or in this situation, like this is the distribution energy charge here. That's the rate that's multiplied by the amount of electricity used, and then you get a bill amount. And so in this, they add up all of your electricity delivery costs, you add it to your supply cost, boom, that's your monthly bill. Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll also note that you see all these charges here, they're pretty much incomprehensible, what they actually mean. I could go through it, but let's just let you know that each one of those things is usually anywhere from 1 to 7 different actual items that are then added together and put on a bill. I'll put a note out there is that these bills are mostly generated by the company the utility company. In this case, these were National Grid formed these, and Rhode Island Energy kind of took it over, PPL took it over. They have a lot of leeway with how they could do this. So I just want to say, like, them presenting it this way is a choice. Amongst all the choices they could have made, this is the one they chose. Why they did that? Well, I can't read their minds. I can make some educated guesses on it. But there's intention behind the way that they break this up. Now, what happens with these, well, I won't jump ahead too much. So this is just a quick look of a piece of what their what the new bill is going to look like. I just stole this from the front page of their website this morning when it says, new things are coming. And this is what again, look, it's going to be fun and different and interesting and very wavy and all that. So the rollout is today. It could be now. If you go online, you might be able to find a new bill and see what it looks like. I don't really know. So I pose this broad question of why are they changing the bill? You got a thought?
Hey, guess what?
It's been too confusing.
Yes.
Who knows?
We don't know what's going on here though either.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back here. So they're gonna change it. So they're gonna change it from something like this that looks something like this and it'll present some set of. The change is actually much more pragmatic than nefarious. It's that PPL, when they bought National Grid, the last thing that they're changing over from National Grid running it to PPL running it is their billing system. They were supposed to have gotten out of the 2-year agreement where National Grid was providing services to PPL. They were supposed to have a 2-year agreement to provide direct services to them as part of the transition. We are now 2 years and 3 months after it. And this was the thing that was holding it up for them to do this on time. Now, I'll note that the bill structure itself is not approved by the Public Utilities Commission, but it's reviewed by them. That's to say is that the Rhode Island Energy presented different drafts to their staff, to the commissioners. There was no formal hearing. There's no hearing process on it. There's no way for the public to weigh in on how they're doing it. But we do know that the regulators, at least the staff of the regulators, have provided some guidance to them. But to that degree, I've got enough idea. It could be anything. It could make up brand new thing. I heard rumors, there's always rumors, the grapevine, the people that practice law, the Public Utilities Commission, we're a very small group. And we're all very chatty sometimes. And I heard rumors that they even wanted to highlight specific renewable energy things to make sure we all knew how much renewable energy was costing. As a way of like, hey, this is what the government's making you do type of framing. I don't know if that's going to be in there, but I look forward to trying to find out to some degree. So it'll be great. So that's the primary change. And if anybody has had billing related issues over the last 2 years, I've had a fair share myself. It has been the worst. It has just been absolutely awful. Because Rhode Island Energy kind of wants us all to be happy. They don't really want us to hate them, but they also can't solve any of our billing issues right now because it's all run by National Grid. And National Grid doesn't give anything about what we think about them. They're out the door. And if they can make Rhode Island Energy's life more difficult along the way, they seem to have taken every opportunity to do so. And when they make their life difficult, it's actually us. It's the customers that are suffering. So the billing system and getting resolution in there has been a complete nightmare since PPL took over. But maybe that'll change now when they run their own system and don't have to rely on National Grid as a billing system vendor, which is just an absurd thought. Okay, that's just a little bit about our bill. A lot of these things we will touch on. So I want to talk a little bit about the distribution charges. So this starts off, as I said before, I talked about 2 of these, but there are 3 elements to our distribution charges. As I said, there's a fixed charge, so the customer charge, the volumetric charge changes on how much energy used, and then there's just the pass-through costs. So there are pieces of the distribution side of our bill that we pay for that the Public Utilities Commission doesn't review or have any insight or control over, that Rhode Island Energy has no insight or control over. It's determined by FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and is just given to you and say, you will pay this. And that's it. So those are pass-through costs. And these are essentially the transmission system. So I'll break this down. There's two pieces. There's the way of getting electricity from point A to point B. There's actually two pieces of it. There's transmission, which is long distance, high voltage, move things over long way, like from a offshore wind farm to the mainland, for example, or from a power plant in Ohio to New York. Those type of distances that we're talking. Hydro-Quebec into New England, transmission lines. The distribution system is like, okay, now we're in Rhode Island. That transmission has to then go into Rhode Island Energy's distribution system, which is to take it, lower the voltage, and give it out to the homes where it's actually going to be used. And so that's, yeah.
Can you also mention ISO New England?
Oh, yeah, so, good, yeah. So ISO New England, I said FERC, but I should also say ISO New England is the regional grid operator. They have a responsibility to making sure that within the region of New England, so it's from Maine to Connecticut and border, is that there's enough electricity coming into that grid to meet the demand of that grid. It's not one state, it's not one piece, it's the entire region. That is their primary objective and primary responsibility. And in doing that, then it goes, okay, so if you generate electricity, you have to be paid for it. And then they also have to collect the cost of it. So ISO New England plays this, I don't call it gatekeeper role so much as engineering role of making sure that the supply and demand are matched. But that being said, there's a whole lot of policy decisions they're making at ISO New England that impact the rest of what we're doing here. And the only way that we are represented at ISO New England is through the Office of Energy Resources. They have a representative that sits on the multi-state board of governors. We have representation there, and there's a number of civil society, like nonprofit organizations. CLF has 2 representatives that sits on subcommittees of the ISO New England, where they are evaluating the policy decisions that are being made when it comes to this. So that's, I know it's really exciting, but also, you know, like you're paying them every day. So we can ignore it if we want, or we can have a little bit of knowledge and see what we can do about it. So this is the distribution system. Just in a nutshell, and I can go as deep as you want. The question is, how long do you want to go? I will note, so the distribution system, so I'm gonna go, just mind me while I jump back. Okay, so you see these rates that are charged here, this 0.062, 0.011, 0.22. Okay, so where do those numbers come from? Fair question. Because that's the rate that you're paying for every kilowatt hour that you use. Well, those rates are determined by the Public Utilities Commission. So this is where the commission comes in. What happens is that a utility will say to the Public Utilities Commission, this is how much it costs us to operate this system. And here's how much we want to invest into new things. And then here's our profit margin that we are going to get because we're a for-profit company. Here's what it all is. This is the rate that we propose to pay us for all of that. And then what the Public Utilities Commission does is goes, all right, let's open up the books. Are all these allowable costs? Do you actually deserve this amount of money? What is your percentage of profit that you're going to make right now? So between the division and then also, what is this money going to be used for in there? Is it to maintain the poles and wires? Is it to invest in a new substation? Is it to increase the number of electric vehicle chargers? Is it for energy efficiency work? Like all of this kind of comes into play. And what happens is that, so the more technical sense is that there's what the utility would call a test year. They go 1 year and say this, they'll open our books for an entire year and say, this is what it cost last year. And so we're going to use that as the basis for our rates moving forward. So the last time that these rates were adjusted, 2018 was the last time. I've got docket numbers if you want it. If you ever want to go back, it is a ream of information. But usually, and in that time, they expected it to be a 3-year rate. Now, the previous time they had done that was 8 years prior. In 2010 was the last time they'd done it. Then they also said they were going to do a 3-year rate. That one lasted 8 years, and this time we're already 6 years into this rate. So 3 years is a estimate, I would say. Now, this time it's a little bit complicated because as part of the settlement to allow PPL to purchase National Grid or buy out National Grid, they agreed that they would not seek to change the rates for a 3-year period. What that 3-year period is, there's a reason why they said 3. One is that for 2 years, they were gonna be under National Grid, they were still gonna be using National Grid services. So you can't use that as a year in which you would evaluate your rates for the future, because you're paying an outside vendor for a whole bunch of stuff. So that doesn't count. So they needed to have 2 years where they're working with National Grid, and then they needed to have 1 full year where they're operating on their own without the National Grid support system. We are starting to enter that 1-year period now. So they are going to run their operations for a year. My guess is September 1 is the start date of their test year. We don't know yet. They'll probably go September 1 of this year to August 30th of next year. And then 3 to 6 months after that, they'll file a new rate case for distribution rates and how much they're going to charge us to distribute electricity. So we are a little bit out from there, but that's when we expect it to come up next. So that would be 2025. So early, first half of 2026 is when we expect. So that'll be the first time that these rates change. Now I say that these rates change, but I don't actually mean that's the only time these rates change. So within each one of these numbers here, there's a number of what we call reconciling factors. So there are things that the utility is not allowed to make money on. So there's their business and infrastructure that they earn a return on equity, return on investment. And then they have these other things that they're required to do, but are not allowed to make any profit off of. So if you're not allowed to make a profit off of it, but you're collecting money from it, at some point you have to reconcile. To run this program, it costs us X amount of dollars, and we collected Y amount of dollars. If we collected too much, we have to give it back to ratepayers. If we collected too little, we need to collect more from ratepayers in the future. So these numbers, while the rates were set 6 years ago, actually change every year. And not on an entirely predictable schedule. So generally, April is the time, by April 1, when the rates change, the supply rate change, that's when they implement a lot of their change in reconciling factors. So for those of us that are real utilities nerds, when we go down to work at the Public Utilities Commission, every year we get a chance to examine what went into these numbers. What did they spend it on? What did they spend it on? What were they supposed to spend it on? And how are they going to adjust these rates? That being said, my ability to actually influence that is small because they have all of the knowledge. We do not have all of the knowledge. But our idea, at least from Conservation Law Foundation's perspective, is yes, we want this to be fair and just. We're not economists, but for us, the most important part is every decision that you make within this, and there's a lot of decisions to be made, have to be consistent with Act on Climate. Is the decision you're making to fund this program going to increase emissions, decrease emissions, not affect emissions? I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but it seems like the question that you should ask every single time. Otherwise, how are we ever going to get to our emissions reductions? So that's our primary goal. The distribution charges there. All right, commodity charges, also known as supply charges. So this is the cost of an electron. So it's a pretty small world of options when you buy your electricity. Last resort service is buying electricity from National Grid or Rhode Island Energy. This is what they provide, and here it is. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There's now community choice aggregation programs, which is where the municipality, instead of Rhode Island Energy being the default supplier, the municipality is a default supplier. They go out to bid, find a new supplier, and use that as a default service. And then there's a whole world of competitive suppliers, which is everybody else. In the utilities world, they're called non-regulated power producers. That just means that the rates that they charge are not regulated. It is more of an open market. If you want to buy from us, here's what we're selling it at. Take it or leave it. Last resort service is a regulated product. It can only be so much, as in Rhode Island Energy is not allowed to make any money off of it. And so that rate is set by the Public Utilities Commission based off of, well, we'll get into what it's based off of. But then the aggregation and the suppliers, that's a free market. You can go, and as long as they promise to deliver the electricity when they say that they're going to deliver the electricity, as long as they can do that, then whatever the price you are willing to pay them for is the price it's going to be. That is not a regulated price. So that's a supply. We're touching on that just a little bit. Okay. This is it. This is really off the chart. But if you want to understand, for most of us, and it's about, if I remember correctly, it's about 75% of the entire state is on last resort service. So the way that they buy electricity really matters. It's the default service that we have. This chart tells you how they buy it. I will explain it to a certain degree. And this is their plan on how they're going to purchase it beginning for delivery in 2025. So this is proposed. It's being considered right now. And we just engaged in that docket last week and have a couple months to work on this. But when you get that price from Rhode Island Energy, say it's 10 cents per kilowatt hour, just made up a number here. What that's made up of is that 10 cents, the 10 cents in April 2025 is made up of 15% purchased in 2024, 20% of electricity was purchased in Q2 of 2024. And you see 20% was purchased 3 months later, 20% was purchased 3 months later, 15% was purchased 3 months later than that, and then 10% is purchased on the day that's needed. This is a laddering and hedging strategy. Rhode Island Energy doesn't have to do this. There's no law mandating that this is how they have to buy electricity. They've chosen to do this in coordination with the Division of Public Utilities and Carriers and the Public Utilities Commission. That's just to say, this is not set in stone by any stretch of the imagination. But the reason that they do this is that if, just like if anybody is in a commodities market in some way, if you buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you have 6 times a purchase for the price on this day, that means you're not locked into the price at any one given moment. This market is volatile. The price of electricity this morning is different than the price of electricity this afternoon. The price in one day is way different than the price in 3 days. It could change by 50%, it could change by 75%, it could change by nothing. You don't know. There's actually a whole set of reporters out there that are looking at long-term trends, try to evaluate this, try to figure out when the best time to buy is, and all of that. This structure here is designed to say, yeah, we're not going to play that game necessarily. We're just going to have set times when we purchase. We're going to add it all up, divide it by 6, by the number of months that this rate is there, and that's what we got. So that's why it's a really awful chart, but it's how they purchase electricity. And I will tell you, no other state in New England buys electricity this way. In Massachusetts, for example, they buy 50% of electricity they need for a year on one day, and 50% of electricity they need 6 months later on the other day. Which is why Massachusetts often has much more volatile prices than Rhode Island does. One thing I'll say with this is Rhode Island has some of the most stable electricity prices in the region because of this strategy. You may say it costs way too much, but when it cost us way too much, in some parts of Massachusetts, it cost them more than double. Because they didn't have purchases from, like this is very much look around the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our price here is tagged to the price of natural gas for the time being. And so natural gas prices spiked. We were paying for electricity that was purchased up to 1.5 years before that spike ever happened. While Massachusetts, when that spike happened 6 months later, they're paying for it. So this is good and bad, to be very clear. It's like when pricing is your number one reason, is your number one goal here, then there's a reason to do this. But there's also a downside to this, which is that so when the market's going up, all these old prices keep our price lower than the current market. But when the market starts to go down, we're going to be paying higher than all that market because we're going to have higher bids while the actual price of electricity is going down. So you get the good when things go up and you get the bad when prices go down. And this is one of the things about natural gas. The prices actually go up and down. They're not always going up. They go up, they go down, they go up, they go down. It's like this whole, I can't tell you what feeds that cycle. I do not have any understanding of that. I just know it happens. The other thing that this means is that we're all locked into this service. It makes it really hard for any other company to provide electricity supply. So for example, if somebody wanted to provide 100% renewable electricity supply product based off of the market prices right now, you are competing against a natural gas price 18 months ago. Well, that's like apples and oranges, but that's the market that you're in. So if I say it was electricity supply salesman and I only sell 100% renewable electricity to everybody, I am out here trying to compete against something that's been locked in for a long period of time. So this keeps people from entering the market. And Rhode Island Energy doesn't care whether this results in a good price or a bad price. All they care is that they got their plan approved, this is how they're going to buy it, and then they follow the plan. The price that results, they are indifferent. It really doesn't matter to them. Because for all of the cost of doing this, they get 100% of their costs refunded from us. So if the price is really high, they get all of that refunded. If the price is low, then they get all of that. And they don't care whether you're on their service or not. Once again, it's America, I guess. There's supposed to be a profit incentive. That's what motivates people to do good work or to find the best price. Rhode Island Energy has no motivation to do anything except propose a plan and follow a plan without regard to what it results in. which is why we're
Aren't they
waiting.
watching the stock price of PPL?
This has no impact on the stock price of PPL because it's complete pass through. So they make no profit off of selling electricity, but they also get no losses. They're completely insured against losses. And then if the prices, if they are undercharging for it, they can then charge us more in future years. If they're if we are overpaying for it, they refund the money back in the future rate year. Yeah.
So given this, why is there, maybe there isn't, why is there an incentive or why is there an interest in utilities protecting fossil fuel distributors and discouraging renewable if there's no financial incentive?
Because for them, I'm actually gonna jump back a little bit here. Because the impact on renewable like the provision of renewable energy actually impacts their distribution system. And what they invest in on how to get electricity from point A to point B. Because for example, if we all had solar panels on our house, you don't need a distribution system. Their profit is 100% distribution system. So if you got rid of distribution systems, you get rid of their profit. They are protecting their distribution system, not the supply. In other states, that is not true. In Rhode Island, it's considered a deregulated state. And what they mean by that is the Rhode Island Energy is not allowed to own natural fossil fuel generating facilities. They're not allowed to own renewable generating facilities. We have a state law that prohibits them from owning generation facilities. Lots of other states in this country, the utility owns the generation facilities, the transmission facilities, the distribution facilities. They have a complete vertical monopoly. In Rhode Island, along with about 15 other states, about early 90s or so, we said, no, we're going to remove the supply system from your monopoly. That's not a natural monopoly. The natural monopoly is distributing it. There's no reason to have multiple companies running wires to your home and competing for your business. But there's no reason that you only have to have one purchaser or one seller of the actual electricity. Anybody can dump electricity onto the grid. So why not have some competition for it? And in order to make that work, you had to get rid of utility ownership over the generation facility. And so there's a line, just because of the month bill that I kind of pulled here, there are other months, if you go back a little, there'll be a line here that said transition charge here. The long story about why the transition charge is not on this bill. It has to do with lawsuits, settlements, money being recouped, and so they don't need to put it on here anymore. But that being said, for a long time, there's a transition charge. And that transition charge is in the distribution system, and that's us paying the utility for them divesting themselves of their fossil fuel generating. So when we changed it so you weren't allowed to own it anymore in the 90s, they go, okay, but you're taking away our assets, you have to pay us for that. And what happened is that a transition charge was added into our distribution rates to compensate them for what they essentially had. They had long-term contracts of delivering this electricity, and they were going to, like, that was their job, and now they're not allowed to do that anymore. So we had to pay them to be allowed to both break their contract and divest themselves of the infrastructure of generating electricity. And we've been paying them that for over 25 years, and we're not paying that now because of settlement around nuclear power plants in the region, which once again, if you want to get into it, I had a very fascinating black hole of filings about 6 months ago. But yeah.
You're saying, so they make their money from the distribution,
Yeah.
which is more the long-term.
Well, they don't make any money from transmission of the high voltage stuff. All of it is moving electricity within our state to your home.
I mean, isn't there still moving electricity with solar system, wind and solar? I mean, there's a certain amount, I mean, wind farm.
Yes.
I mean, not everybody is just like your own little home.
Yes.
I mean,
No, that's I was going to like the. I'm sorry. What was that?
I mean, there's a certain amount of distribution
Yes.
needed versus needed.
Yes, and what's happening is that there's less demand for for the large infrastructure of distribution system as we get to more distributed energy generation.
So it's just relatively.
It's less. But then it's like every $1 million of infrastructure that we avoid is $1 million saved for us. And it's about $90,000 of lost profit to them. We save money, they lose profit.
Is that true for wind? You've got offshore is not
Yeah.
as much of the.
I mean, we still will need, especially if the more that we have, the system, like this entire structure here was designed for when there is large generators that then have to go out to small piece. But what we're trying to move towards is a grid that has some large generators, but a lot more distributed generation. And what that does means that your distribution system has to change, for one, and it often has to be less. Because now it's more about how do I move electricity between a small neighborhood with a large inflow of a few like offshore wind plants or connecting to other jurisdictions. And a lot less of what they have now, which is everything's that way. So it's this constantly spiderweb network. Now it's more of a integrated network. Maybe it's this, maybe it's more like microgrid concept of here, here. Each one has generation capacity, and maybe they link to each other. And so a lot of that linking to each other is still going to be distribution cost, but they'll still make it. But some of this is not distribution costs. Like this, are just homeowners linking and combining their efforts to work together, or commercial entities working together that way, and less of these large scale distribution, which is how the system was built to begin with. Yeah.
So when we testified for the removal of the net metering limit for residential solar, the argument of the opposition, which was the utility and the Public Utilities Commission, was mainly that if they all start producing, then they pepper their roof with solar panels, they produce the heck out of it, and there's a sunny day, the grid can't take it. So that was all gaslighting.
Yeah, well, it's, yes, some of it is, and some of it isn't. And the part that isn't gaslighting is that our system needs things that it doesn't have now to accomplish that. And if we don't do those things like battery storage, for example, well, then what they have to do is shut off your generation. So it's either one, you give the utility control over when you generate and when you don't, because if they've got too much, it could break everything. So they have to be able to shut you off, or install enough battery storage so it's stored and then discharged when it's needed. We don't have that capacity right now. And so if the system got flooded, there are engineering solutions to this. They don't have them in place.
Yeah, what we objected to was the categoric use of that argument, because we said, if you put solar up, you have to file for a permit. They know upfront who installs what capacity. And if they reach a situation like that, then they can intervene and not just shut everything down because someone might get into that trouble.
Yes, that is it.
Will they make money installing battery systems? Will they make profit?
This is an open area. The answer to that is going to depend on a future docket. So this last year, a law was passed, the Energy Storage Act was passed. And one of the things that it says, one, it's a directive to buy a certain amount of energy storage capacity, install it on the grid now, because we know it's coming. We don't necessarily know how much we need yet. We know it's more than what they're buying, but let's start. The other piece is to create a tariff. A tariff in this world is that if you are giving, if as a customer, I'm taking something from the utility, a tariff is them deciding how much I have to pay for it. Well, if I have a battery that's attached to the grid, sometimes it takes electricity from the grid. Okay, how much do you get charged? Sometimes it puts energy back into the grid. How much do you get paid? Right now, we don't have an answer to those questions. So you have a big battery system, unless you're using for your own internal home. The question of how much you're going to get paid and how much you're going to pay, the answer is 0 and 0. Or how much you're going to pay is whatever the price of electricity at this time is. So you just have a regular rate that you have now. And how much you're going to get paid is 0, because there's no tariff to pay battery storage generators to put electricity on the grid yet.
But if they build a big battery storage, is that capital investment, or is that more like generation?
You've actually put your finger on a fight. And that they have consistently said, as we went through that creation of that bill, which was the result of a stakeholder process, they continually said, battery storage is not generation. We should be allowed to do this and be allowed to avail ourselves of that market. Others have said, yeah, but it is generation half the time. And so maybe you shouldn't be allowed to own this. Right now, the precedent is that they can, but that's not a foregone conclusion for all time. So, yeah. Oh, Jesus, I'm not even paying attention to time. Sorry.
Is that energy storage bill specific for like conventional batteries, or is it open-ended to like hydrogen or other energies?
It's open-ended.
It's open-ended?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we should.
How much time? Okay, let me just blow through a little bit and we'll have Q&A. So I want to talk about a little bit about restructuring that's happening now. So you don't have to read this necessarily, but like 16,387, just so you know, that's their proposed rate beginning in October 1, in case you're curious. But as you see here, one of the things that the Public Utilities Commission has seen this rate and see how it's structured, and they go, you know what, we're interested in changing this. Right now, we have 2 6-month rate periods from April till the end of September, and then October to the end of March. That's your, like, and this is supply rate, how much you pay for the supply of electricity, that you have these 2 rate periods, it happens every year. They're talking about a variable potentially moving us all to a monthly rate, because the price of electricity is different every month, and they bid for it every month, and they have this listed out, where they will charge, our rate would change every single month. That's one way. They're talking about a hybrid, where maybe it's 3-month periods, and they were talking about October, February, and March is one, and then November, December, January is another. And that's a potential way. And so they're looking at potentially changing the rate periods here. Our question, and why CLS got involved here, is like, if you change the rates, you're changing consumer expectations. You're also going to change consumer behavior, because suddenly your prices in January are going to look huge. Like right now, maybe we're looking at a 16,387 for this winter. If they let just the January rate by itself, it'd be about 24 cents. But they have January blended in with the other 5 months, that brings it down, but also in October, it brings it up. Because otherwise in October, you pay 9. So right now, we're not paying 9 in October, we're paying 16. We're not paying 24 in January, we're paying 16. So what happens if you actually pay 9 in October and 24 in January? How will our consumption patterns change? And if our consumption patterns change, what's the emissions impact of that, given that a lot of our electricity is not renewable at this point? So that's one question. That's the question that they have raised right now. This is like nibbling at the real question. Massachusetts is going way more complex and thinking about it. They're doing an entire interagency working group on rates to evaluate across the board of what type of rate structure would be more equitable and is also necessary in order for us to achieve our climate emissions. This is not just the supply rates of like every 6 months, but also how you create those variable or volumetric rates and fixed rates. So what I do want to jump to is like this. And this is kind of the piece, is like the rate structure that we have now was developed for a very specific purpose. And it was flows out of the 1970s. And the idea was we need to consume less. Conservation is key. In order to make conservation key, you increase the price of something. If you increase the price of it, there will be less of it. So what they have done is created a way that makes it so the more electricity you use, the more expensive it's going to be. But if you want to electrify an entire economic system, do you really want it so that the more electricity you use, the more expensive it is? Because how is some people going to invest in heat pumps or move to EVs if doing so presents an enormous cost increase, especially for low income folks? And the idea here is like, the idea behind this is that you can't look at electricity rate by themselves. It has to be looking at the price of natural gas and the price of gasoline to fuel our cars. And that the idea here is that you want to make electricity the best choice as opposed to those other choices. And part of that is decreasing volumetric rates, which means like just because you use more doesn't necessarily mean you pay more, but increase your fixed charges so that everybody pays a certain amount every month, which means that if you buy that electric vehicle and everything, you are not facing a significant a financial burden to do so, and doing it in a way that is equitable through bill discounts, but also considering the price of other commodities. So there's a lot of, we can go into some depth here. I can send over additional information, but the idea here is to redesign our rates because we actually want people to use more electricity. Like we're not in the world where we want to conserve. We want you to use more because we want you to get rid of your gas vehicle and get an EV. I want you to get rid of your natural gas boiler and put in an electric heat pump. But in our current system, you're penalized for doing that. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so the idea behind rate design is in order to achieve those type of more equitable goals and also to encourage people to do electrification by not penalizing somebody for it. And I was I'll just leave this up here. Sometimes this goes wrong. Actually, this goes wrong all the time. But this is a good system. This is a good just sample is that when the Block Island Wind Farm was originally approved, they charged a transmission surcharge for that cable. And that was in order for them to pay for the maintenance of it and potentially reburying it and all of that. after a couple of years, it found out that they were collecting millions upon millions, tens of millions of dollars that they did not have to use for any of that. And Ron Grotowski, the chairman, said, like, it's ridiculous that you're doing this, but we can't get any of that money back. It is impossible to get that money back. They have a legal claim to it. They had the rates approved. They collected the rates as approved. It just turns out that everybody was wrong how much it was going to cost to maintain that cable. And they got the windfall for it because we all approved it, which makes you just go, huh, if everybody's wrong and in the direction of it helps the utility, well, that seems to be a good deal. But this is an idea, this is just putting out there is like, system's not perfect and we know that. And sometimes it's abundantly not perfect in this situation. But anyway, I'll leave that aside. I know we got more to go to. And I imagine.
Okay. Hi, everyone. The chair and I'm Emily Koo. I'm the Senior Policy Advocate and Rhode Island Program Director for Arcadia Center. And joining me virtually is my colleague Oliver, who's I'll let him introduce himself. Sorry, I'm not going with this mouse. Goodness.
Oh, I didn't stop sharing.
I know, I'm struggling just with the mouse.
The mouse doesn't work.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah, Oliver, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Can you all hear? I think it's just on the computer. It's just on the computer. Is that a speaker? Let me see.
Yeah, let's have some.
Oh. Okay. It doesn't sound like the speaker's working now.
Cool, I didn't get to the comments. Sorry about that.
Oliver, you want to try speaking, introducing yourself, and we can see how much we can hear you?
Okay, is that working better?
Hang on, it's still just the computer audio, but. Oh, yeah, that's not, try again.
Hello?
One moment. Oh, so you know, what's that? Is that 6.5? That's. Oh, here we go. I can do this. Like the speaker. Try again, Oliver.
Hey, hello?
Here we go.
Yes, we got it. Okay, that's better.
Can you turn up your volume?
Yep,
a little
I
bit
didn't
too?
maximize, unfortunately, but maybe this will work. Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself, Oliver.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Oliver Tully. Very nice to be here virtually with you all. Should I keep going? Can you hear me okay?
Speak as loud as you can.
No, wake up the baby.
Yeah, I'll try not to wake up the child. I work on utility regulatory policies at Arcadia Center. For those of you who don't know, we are a nonprofit research and advocacy organization that works on climate-related clean energy policies, not only in Rhode Island, but throughout New England. And yeah, Emily, if it sounds good to you, I can just dive into the presentation.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. Well, we have been working on a piece of legislation with Senator Dawn Euer that addresses a number of important things that build off of what Jamie was talking about. And I first just wanted to provide a little bit of background to give some context that I think will set the stage for what we're going to talk about in a second. So firstly, distribution utilities like Rhode Island Energy play three key roles. They plan for the future of our energy system by forecasting demand and mapping out what's needed. They then build and own that infrastructure like poles and wires that gets built to meet that need. And then they serve customers by delivering power to our homes and businesses. And as we think about being able to address climate change, utilities are a key player that can either help hurt our efforts. When a state sets a long-term goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, utilities and public utility commissions play a very important role in figuring out how to actually achieve those goals and how to make the right investments to start lowering emissions. And what informs whether utilities are actually good partners in the clean energy transition are the policies that regulators put in place that provides the context in which utilities conduct their business decisions. The problem from our perspective is that existing regulation creates financial conflicts of interest for the utility, and Jamie touched on some of this. As a regulated monopoly, utilities have to seek approval for their investments from PUCs, and they recover the cost of those investments through our monthly bill. Utilities earn an authorized rate of return. So Jamie was talking about the profits that utilities make on their distribution system investments. Those are usually around 9 or 10% profit on certain investments. Those investments are called capital expenses, things like poles, wires, substations, and that 9 or 10% is designed to mimic what conditions would be like if these were normal businesses competing against other private companies. However, some solutions that may be cheaper or cleaner than traditional investments like distributed energy resources or other clean energy solutions, they are technically defined as operating expenses. And those are the things that are passed through, like Jamie was talking, in addition to generation costs and transmission, these operating expenses are also passed through without an added return or profit on them. So utilities have an incentive to choose the investments that they usually make, like building a pole and wire system, as opposed to investing in the infrastructure that's needed to support these distributed energy resources. Literally, it's pretty much spend money to make money. The more they spend, the higher their returns are. And so in this way, utilities have a financial stake in the outcomes of regulators' decisions to either approve or deny their investment decisions. And what we see is this leading to a misalignment between what may be best for a utility shareholder versus all of us, the utility customers. And it also leads to a system that's much more expensive than it needs to be. So the legislation that we have been working on tries to address these dynamics in a couple of different ways. And I will pass it to Emily to talk about the first one.
Thanks, Elmer. Yeah, that's great framing. So I'll mention this was first introduced for the first time this last session. It's Senate Bill 2956 and sponsored by Senator Dawn Euer. So I'll go through the key provisions of that. Carrie's April contributed to one provision. Jamie is sort of the author of a particular provision, and of course the senator contributed to a large part of it. The first one is really adding a new responsibility to, yes, 2956, to the PUC's mandate, so that the priorities of equity, environmental justice, and greenhouse gas emission reductions are placed on level footing with the traditional responsibilities of the PUC, which are safety, reliability, and affordability. So that's just pretty broad framing of what the responsibilities and what the mandate of the Public Utilities Commission are, to center those values. And we've seen similar provisions passed in Maine and Massachusetts in recent years, and it has pretty important implications for how our PUC regulates utilities. Go on. Go ahead, Albert.
Thanks. Yeah, we actually played a role in both of those bills and helped write the main legislation that got passed. So we're really excited about doing something similar for Rhode Island. The next major piece is requiring the Public Utilities Commission to implement what's called performance-based regulation. This is a more modern approach to regulating utilities that seeks to align their revenues with better performance outcomes. The system that we've been describing so far tonight is basically designed around how expensive it is to build and maintain the system, what it costs, and that's what informs utilities revenues. And we are trying to move away from that. So it expands the metrics that are used to measure utility performance. Today, there are a somewhat limited set of basic metrics around safety and reliability, and performance-based regulation tries to build on top of those metrics to implement things around explicit goals around reducing greenhouse gas emissions, metrics around distributed energy resources, promoting environmental justice. There's a whole potential world of new metrics that can deliver the kinds of outcomes that we want to see and provide, in many cases, a very formal yardstick by which we're measuring utility performance. Those metrics can either just be publicly reported, or they can actually be tied to financial rewards or penalties as a further incentive or disincentive to deliver the kinds of outcomes that we're seeking. So the goal of PBR is to make sure that utilities are financially encouraged to align their business decisions with overall policy goals. And quite a few states around the country have already made a lot of progress on PBR. It looks different in different places, and some states kind of take bits and pieces of it. But there has been quite a bit of success already. And we're trying to draw on those lessons to kind of move Rhode Island further in this regard. The next piece of the legislation is another acronym, which stands for Integrated Distribution System Planning. The main thing to take away is just integrated planning. Today, when I talked about utilities planning for the future, anticipating and forecasting growth on the system and meeting that future need, that's done in a very siloed way. It's essentially a black box. There is very minimal stakeholder input or review into that process. And we're interested in doing it in a much more integrated way. So integrated system planning is a more comprehensive approach to long-term planning. And the goals are to increase transparency and to explicitly align those planning efforts with goals around climate change, equity, environmental justice, and clean energy. The idea is that more stakeholder input can lead to better outcomes. And this kind of integrated planning is even more critical as we think about the need to coordinate activities between the electric and gas side of the distribution systems. As Jamie described, the need to accelerate the electrification of our buildings and transportation sectors, we need to make sure that that transition is coordinated. And integrated system planning is one way to do that. Like PBR, performance-based regulation, integrated planning looks different in different places, but many states are starting to engage in this kind of coordinated long-term planning. So again, I think there are a lot of lessons that Rhode Island can pull from. And the PUC, as we speak, is nearing the tail end of what they're calling a future of gas proceeding, which is looking long-term at the future of the gas system and what may need to change. And we're hoping to build on those efforts to make it truly integrated across the entire energy system.
Yeah, this next provision is one that April and Carrie helped initiate a draft based on some national best practices. And it it's pretty easy to understand actually of all the provisions. So we hope to really talk to legislators about this particular provision a lot in the coming year. It sets restrictions on the ability of our investor-owned utilities, like Rhode Island Energy, to use ratepayer funds on lobbying and other kinds of expenses that are not in the ratepayers' areas. So that could include membership costs for trade associations that are actively lobbying against climate and clean energy progress, for example. And we've seen similar restrictions passed in Colorado, Maine, and Connecticut in recent years. And I believe we really looked at Maine and Connecticut's laws in developing the language for this particular bill. The next piece is actually Jamie's piece. You ready?
Yes, of course, always ready. I'll just come here. So the other piece that we asked to have put into this is there's a plan to modernize the grid. And then there's a plan, and then the idea is also to plan for resiliency of the grid. Modernization is what is it going to take to move a grid that's all designed around point A to point B to one that's more like the distributed energy system. So that's the idea of grid modernization. There's a lot of little pieces in this, but it's really what investments do you need to make in order to have a grid work when electricity is not generated just in large singular power plants, but is really being generated in lots of distributed ways. The grid needs to change. It needs to become a modern grid. And that's the first part of this. Now they proposed a plan for it. Don't get me started. Don't have enough time to express my anger and disappointment about their grid modernization plan, but I will admit that it exists. The other piece we wanted to add in is resiliency plan. So this is how is the grid ready for increased storm activity, sea level rise, increased flooding events? Are you building your substations in floodplains? Yeah, they are. They're using our money to build things in land they know is going to be inundated. I'll take, for example, National Grid built a liquefaction facility at the port, which is going to be underwater before the end of its useful life. That sometimes the land's cheaper, they already own it, type of thing. But the idea is that they need to do risk assessments of before they invest our money into infrastructure that they get to earn a profit off of. Let's make sure that it's going to be resilient and usable in the climate that we're going to have, thanks to everything that they've done for the last 50 years. Really appreciate that. So we want the specific vulnerability assessments of everything that they currently have, as well as anything that they're going to put in. And both of these plans need to be updated every 5 years at a minimum, as the science changes and as the situation changes. So those are two provisions that are also in the bill. I'll get back.
What are the penalties for utilities that refuse to think?
None.
Okay. Wait, can we think about that?
All right. I'll go on to the last. So I'll note, so we just covered pretty high level the 5 core concepts in Senate Bill 2956. We will note that that's not everything in the bill. There are a few smaller kind of fixes, including kind of open and competitive procurement for expenditures of ratepayer funds greater than 100K, which we agree with, and a few other items. So we just wanted to cover these larger concepts to give you as advocates a good understanding of the kinds of reforms we're advocating for. I just wanted to also cover the concept of grid enhancing technologies. Arcadia Center is currently working on developing legislation, identifying sponsors for a bill that would incentivize our investor-owned utilities to invest in grid enhancing technologies, which we call GETs. So GETs are any hardware or software technology that enables an enhanced or efficient performance from our electric grid, which can be either a transmission or distribution system. If we're talking about state legislation, we're probably talking about our distribution system, which is what Jamie really largely covered. So also, as Oliver really outlined, the existing business model for our utilities incentivizes these large infrastructure investments. So you spend money to make money. So they really have the incentive to just build more, build large. And there's less of an incentive to invest in these cost-effective GETs that can increase the capacity and resilience of the grid with smaller and shorter term investments. So examples of GETs are things like dynamic line control, which is essentially using real-time weather data to calculate the thermal limits and to be able to get more out of your distribution lines in certain weather. Advanced power flow control is the ability with sensors, either software or hardware, to push and pull electric power to balance any overloaded or underutilized lines, so it's just a slightly smarter use and pushing and pulling of power. Topology optimization is a little bit more of like a big picture thinking chess game of like identifying reconfigurations and the ability to reroute power flows around congested or overloaded lines. So it's really just like a smarter, like low cost, efficient ways for the utility to invest in getting more out of what we currently have in our system before making those big investments. And a lot of those conversations are happening in relation to something called system reliability procurement. There's a working group, and they're trying to make their process a little bit more open in terms of procurement. And groups like ours are advocating for investments like this, as opposed to just kind of bigger infrastructure investments. But the way that the system is set up and the business model just doesn't incentivize investments. And so we're looking at how state legislation can require that utilities actually consider and deploy these in their investments and planning. Yeah, so that's a separate piece of legislation, but quite related. So I can open it up to Q&A. Yeah. Oh, and here is our contact information. Sorry, you can, yeah.
A question to the chat from Nick Horton. He says it sounds like utilities are disincentivized to support distributed solar. Are they incentivized or disincentivized to support offshore wind?
I don't know if it's this. I find it hard to draw a one-to-one connection on incentives or disincentives on the offshore wind, because they do get to build a bunch of infrastructure in order to accommodate offshore wind. They're pro that. And so the downside is, I don't know if we call it downside, it's like they want to own and control more of that system than necessarily we would necessarily think is necessary, for example. So in general, I have not experienced Rhode Island Energy to be a specific barrier to offshore wind procurement, with the caveat of the last bill that passed that directed them to do it. They didn't actually sign any contracts and then moved into a 3-state procurement for it. I could be cynical and say they just didn't like the provisions of that, or you can be like, well, or they're opportunistic and said, there's a bigger fish out here and you only authorize up to 1,000 megawatts and we want to do 1,500, 1,800, we want to go bigger. And there's an opportunity to go bigger. I think that's a Rorschach test, is that if you want to criticize the utility on that, you can find reasons to. If you think that they're doing it to procure more offshore wind, you can find justification for that opinion as well. And so I don't think that they have had as much concern with it, except for price. They don't want to pay, if they pay a higher price for the electricity generated in offshore wind, then they're the ones that are going to take flack for selling it to us at a higher rate. Now, whether it is actually a higher rate, it's a debatable thing as well. So it's the negotiation between them and what are the offshore wind generators trying to sell their electricity for, and will Rhode Island Energy accept that price on all of our behalf. So,
yeah, thank you, very interesting. But we're close to 2025, right? And the IPCC report says by 2030, we have to make significant reductions in emissions. And that we also have to convert to renewables very quickly. It's an emergency. In analyzing the proposals you made, have you had a model of over the next 5 years, if everything was accepted, how much emissions would be reduced and how far would we get to convert to renewables?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has to do really with the way that performance-based regulation can play out by saying you need to reduce emissions by a certain amount in alignment with the Act on Climate. I think there's also a lot of that near-term dialogue is unfolding in the future of gas docket and our ability to incorporate and integrate the decommissioning of the gas system with the upscaling and upgrading of the electric system. I don't know if Oliver or Jamie, you have other.
I can
Oh, so Oliver, go ahead.
I can chime in on just one thought that I had. So there are a lot of studies out there and different modeling exercises that have taken place that show kind of different conclusions about what's needed and on what timeline. But I just wanted to throw in from our perspective as advocates, what makes it challenging is that the entities that we've been discussing tonight is not the entire world of people that play a really important role in making sure that we're driving those emissions down. When Jamie was talking about ISO New England and the generation resources, those are private companies that own a gas power plant, for example, and they bid into a market, and then our distribution utilities buy that electricity and pass it on to us. The problem is, as you're alluding to, I think around 50% of ISO New England is made up by natural gas. That's a huge number that needs to go down extremely fast. So the challenge with restructuring in the 1990s, when they separated out these different pieces and cut off generation from utilities, it made it much more complicated and difficult for advocates like everyone here to identify solutions and work with the right entities to make sure that things are moving forward. Anyways, it doesn't fully answer what you're saying, but it's just more food for thought.
One more frame on that question is that a lot of the things that we've talked about here, the analogy I would use is that it's more like the Constitution. It is setting the rules of how decisions are going to be made, changing the evaluation structure, who gets to make the decisions, and how they get made. But the question of whether we're going to meet those goals will flow from the decisions that get made under these different systems. And so the idea here is that first, reform the system so you can get different outcomes, then engage the system to actually achieve those outcomes. We haven't landed number one yet, where the rule, we have to shift away from a system that was designed from the 70s to the 90s for a different purpose into one that's now with the core purpose of reducing emissions, as opposed to it was agnostic about emissions for decades. So first we have to change the rules so that they're all the entities that are all have to start rowing in the same direction, have the clear direction that that's where they have to go, as well as the specific goals that they have to meet. And then unless we're going to get rid of investor-owned utilities and all of that, which another conversation, until we do that, we have to align financial incentives with the outcomes that we want within the current economic model. So all of these is designed to like, let's do that. And then we can fight about the individual decisions. Because right now, I can't fight the natural gas power plant on its decision to continue to sell gas because that's where the money is for them. And I don't own them and I can't tell them not to do it. So we have to change it so where they don't, where the incentive is no longer to buy from them. They're out of step, but the more renewable energy is what's in line with what the goals of everybody, that the regulators, utilities, consumers, and then all the independent entities are going to be aligned with this. So the answer is, we pass all of this? No, we can still miss it. Totally.
So to follow up, you said, change the rules and then engage. So I think Gary has some idea of how to support legislation.
Mhm.
Is there a role for informed concerned citizens to directly impact what the PUC does under whatever rules they're working on?
Sometimes yes, most times no. And I say that not out of some joy of my answer, but it's because they require you to have a lawyer to even participate in the conversation. You can send in all the public comments that you want, and I don't want to dissuade anyone from doing it. But as once again, one of the lawyers then that is working with this, your comments are not particularly relevant to what the utility is deciding. Because the rules aren't aligning their incentives and goals with what the comments that we're putting out there are. And so they go, well, the rules don't say that I don't have to take your opinion into account because it's not situated with the decision we're making here. So your opinion does not influence the outcome of this specific docket. That's not to say don't engage, but it's like we have to realign the rules so that your engagement matters. at this point.
And something that states have advocated for is what's it called, the fund, so that people interested parties can get funds for a lawyer to participate. But I saw that Hans had a question, I think you also have a question.
Yeah, I just want to follow up actually after what Jeff said, is if for some possible way, if we can get the community informed of like what's going on in real time right now, which could possibly convince more people to get on board with renewable energy, like with solar on their homes or what have you, then maybe that in itself could be the incentive to those companies. So maybe that is a different approach. That's technically a question, not a statement or suggestion.
Take it as a statement and suggestion that it is, yes.
Would that potentially work, like if we as Carrie try to do like an education platform for the public to inform them, like what you do for us? And would that potentially work to get the community informed, and therefore if they take their own action to be like,
I think,
and
and this is just like an offhand strategic thought about it, is that just be clear about what the ask is. And for example, if the ask is, the state just got $50 million to support the installation of more heat pumps and to get off that, well, make the ask, you go get a heat pump. Like, cause that's the thing that's going to change the system, is that we all start moving in that direction. And all of these things are lagging behind public sentiment and public demand. And so we have to continue to articulate that there is demand for alternatives to fossil fuels in order for everybody else to be like, oh, we should really plan for that. Because right now,
more people
we need more people to do, and I hate to say this, but it's not the consumer's fault, but it's also the consumer's opportunity to change the system by using our dollars to demand and build a different system and not wait for them to do it for us, because they're not going to.
So tying into that with the cost of renewables going down, they are already less expensive over the lifetime of the installation than fossil-based energy. And also the demand and also the deployment of renewables going really exponential right now already on a global level. Is there a scenario that so much demand is there for installing all of that, that the lacking processes here, the lack of the right incentives for the PUC first and then for the utility will lead to approval times that are just exorbitant? I think about Warren on Newport adding solar on a brownfield, I think it was Warren, and it was 9 years lead time from start to finish. They just got it approved. So that all will be too late for what we try to accomplish.
And it just leads to the question, is like the system that's in place to not design, but to actually to interconnect these resources to that system is not just broken. It's not delivering on the needs of anybody at the moment, but we are stuck in the system because the inertia is there, and to change it takes political power and a political will to say, we need to make it like, I'll give you an example. It's like, say that 100 people are proposing to put up renewable energy facilities, whether it's on the rooftop, ground mounted, whatever. 100 people have a plan to do it. They got a contract signed with an installer to put those things in. Got timelines of construction. You then have to apply to Rhode Island Energy to make sure that their grid can take in what you have. But you don't know if you're number 1 or number 100 in that line. And you don't know if 50 people before you are actually going to build the infrastructure. So for you, it's already built. You don't know that. There's no transparency in the queue, in the list. You don't know how many people are there. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they're going to build. But the utility is using that to say, great, well, all of these are going to require infrastructure costs. Maybe we can charge all of them for the same one. And they're pulling shenanigans like that because a lack of transparency is a place where things like double dipping happen, but also means that the PUC doesn't know. necessarily what the Q line is going to be. If they want to know, they have to submit a legal request for discovery to Rhode Island Energy, wait a period of time, get it back, see if they got what they're supposed to get, and then ask for more questions afterwards, not like a public transparency. The alternative is like our transmission system. If you wanted to build like a utility scale, like hydropower facility in the hills of the Berkshires, you're not applying to your local utility, you're applying to the transmission, you're applying to ISO New England for it. They have a completely transparent, you know exactly who's in front of you, you know if they get approved, what they're going to build, so you can plan accordingly. The other system is, it's there. In fact, it's in place in our state, but we don't have that transparency to plan accordingly.
Yeah, their complete obstruction is for adding 8 panels to our solar system. It took, I think, 7 or 8 rounds of rejections and refilings with no reason provided, just made up bullshit stuff. And it delayed us, fortunately, only by a month, but I think Dana can probably attest to that. She's on the floor, they installed our system. And when we installed the initial system, it was just the same, you know.
And one of the hardest parts is that, like to change that, somehow we have to convince enough legislators in the House and Senate. First, to understand what the hell we're talking about, and then to come to a reasoned opinion about it, not just what, because if you don't know, who do you go to? You probably go to utility to answer your question, as opposed to me, little old me going like, no, we're lying to you. No. Maybe we should do it this other way. But in order to change the system, it's not about dollars and cents even, it's a political question. And you have to have enough political power and political will to change the system as it is. And that's hard because I'm gonna tell you, I think I know 4, maybe 5 legislators that could have followed our conversation today. That's about it.
Surprised.
I was curious if there's any advocacy being done here, kind of like Massachusetts has the clean heat standard, so they're trying to reduce how much, or just try to increase renewables or production and demand flexibility during certain times. So that's something that's related to like performance incentive mechanisms or PBR, or things that would have to be individually kind of advocated for it.
Yeah, we see that as a pretty core, like economy-wide need to scale up the uptake of heat pumps. And there has been a clean heat standard bill advocated for. Green Energy Consumers Alliance and our 2 organizations are advocating for it. It's just not politically viable. It's kind of, and it's absurd because the state's climate plans and various state commitments continue to say that they are going to explore such a thermal trading system is similar to RGGI, and it's what we need. But I think it is worth, seeing how the Massachusetts process goes, which is what we are tracking, and trying to push for something like that long term. Yeah.
So is it the case that in Rhode Island, that as a residential, you put solar on your roof, you get credit for what you give, but you don't get a refund? I mean, you get credit for what you put in, but if there's a surplus, you don't get refunded.
All right, so
First, is that accurate? And
it is both accurate and inaccurate at the same time. It is accurate as in, that's what the rules say. It is inaccurate because that's not how the utility operates. Which, once again, you think I'm speaking in circles, I am. But in essence, what they're supposed to do right now is that there's no mechanism where they're directly told, you built up this credit to pay it out to you. I know in the bill that was worked on this year, that was one of the ways to be fixed. But in practice, maybe not every month, but if you close that account, they're gonna pay you.
for whatever credit you have.
Yeah. So it's not that they won't, it's that they won't while your account's open. But in that sense, because you might use those credits at some time in the future, so why would we pay you out for it unless there's a legislative mandate?
It's also debt on their books that reduces their credit rating.
They don't want the debt on their books either. And so as soon as that account's closed, it's a debt, they pay it off as well. And I only say that because I had a house with solar panels, we sold the house and I got to pay the balance that was left on it because, we sold after we had a surplus. And I was like, I am not supposed to get this. You sending me this is against all of your rules. That being said, I'm not gonna tell you to take it back either. I will take my $200 and be very happy about it. So the answer, like, right now, there's no formal process for it, but there are times when the utility will make a business decision that says it's best for us to pay this.
It's in their interest.
What
And
I,
it's in their interest.
what I've been poking around on is, little known, this was shown in the system reliability procurement. The utility does maintain for the electric system, this map of all of their distribution assets for electricity. And so you can zoom in on your house and see what substation, and then it also has heat maps and hosting capacity. There are little like disclaimers, so maybe that description, when you say I accept all the terms and conditions, can explain what it is. Might help you understand, 'cause it's still hard to understand. But essentially the red means like if I wanted to build a solar farm over here in Snaketon, there's very limited capacity to do so on those feeders. But if I wanted to put solar on my house right here, I probably could, but it's not super clear. This is intended, actually, there's an intro, this is intended to help customers, but really developers decide where they can build out electric. But it came up in kind of when we're advocating for all electric new construction, is there going to be capacity to build like an affordable housing development on this meter or not? And it should be here. And also there's not really an effort to coordinate how does this overlap the gas system? So if we're going to decommission the gas system over here, maybe we can't because there's not the electric capacity yet to electrify the homes over here. So those kinds of questions.
Which is why we need independent distribution
Yeah,
system
Which is
planning
why we need integrated planning.
to make it so that the utility isn't the one making the call.
Sorry, I didn't share my screen, but I did share the link for those of you online. You can poke around on that map.
Yeah, I'm curious, is there any conversation about publicly owned utilities happening in Rhode Island?
There has been.
And what's?
I know Cranston had a proposal 6-8 years ago. This, the answer is, as great as it would be, they just bought, Rhode Island Energy just bought our electric and gas distribution system for about $6 billion. So if we were to become a publicly owned, the first thing we'd have to do is give those investors $6 billion. So it's not that it can't be done, it's that the price of entry is a little steep for it. So it's like, you know, how many bridges is that?
I think it's like, yeah, it feels really out of reach to me when academics ask me that, but like, I think we're trying to democratize pieces of it. And like, for example, aggregation, I don't feel like this came across, but aggregation can be really good because you're putting the control of like what kind of electricity you're sourcing in the hands of like residents, ideally, which that was Providence's goals. And then you're trying to kind of take away some other aspects of the monopoly and shape what aspects of the monopoly, who they're serving and why.
I would also say that if we were to distinguish between the gas and electric system, there's might be more of an effort to reduce the value of our gas system over time, and then to finish the phase out of it, become a public entity, and then finish the job. Because the utility has no interest in getting rid of its business, but there's a number of things that are happening right now that say, maybe you bought a $2 billion gas system, but 2 years later, it's a $1.5 billion system because the future of gas stock has said, well, this is how we're going to do this. The climate standards say by 2050, we're net zero, so there can't be a gas system here. So you bought something, it is worth less now because future revenues are diminished. You can also do things in some of these bills to change the depreciation schedule so that you can quicken the depreciation of their assets so that when we go to purchase it, they've already taken a tax write-off for a lot of it, and we buy what's left in order to finish the job. So I am thinking of how do we get to a point where you can buy the gas system in order to eliminate it. But in all that effort, it will make the electric system more valuable and harder to ever become a public entity. So
I can also just chime in on a thought there. There are definitely trade-offs. I think we can make really good arguments for why publicly owned utilities would be better, but it may not be a foregone conclusion. I think when we look around the country, we can find well-run public utilities and we can find poorly run public utilities. And I think as we're thinking about advocacy and trying to remove some of the barriers that being investor-owned presents, we can think about maybe what's going to happen faster. We're thinking about decisions like, do we want to spend 7 or 10 years transitioning to a publicly owned utility or trying to move ahead as fast as we can on these pieces that might be achievable. So I don't think there's a perfect answer, and we've done a lot of work, or at least we've tangentially done work in Maine on exactly this issue. But everyone kind of comes up with a different conclusion.
There was a question about how smart meter implementation will fold into this, which you might have a word to say on, Oliver.
Yeah, smart meters are vital. And Jamie will know more about kind of implementation currently in Rhode Island. But as we're thinking about doing advanced forecasting, the data that smart meters, which are the meters on your homes, can collect much more rapidly and convey that information to the utilities. That allows for really advanced modeling and forecasting, which informs long-term planning decisions around where to put certain resources, where to invest. And it's, sorry, my baby is literally crying and just woke up right now, so I was distracted by that. But yeah, it's a crucial piece of the puzzle. And there was one other thing I wanted to mention too, but maybe if you give me a sec, I will remember what it was.
Good.
Smart meters make a percentage of the population sick. My wife is one of them. They can be made to be safe smart meters, but they're not. We need to lobby for that too.
No disagreement.
One thing it did occur to me, if I heard correctly earlier, I think someone was asking what is the penalty for utilities not thinking, I think was the question, or not thinking about the future. And utilities can do a lot wrong and still survive. I don't know how many times PG&E in California has gone bankrupt in recent years, but they're still around and operating. And I think although there are potentially few consequences for not acting, there are a couple things to come to mind, and the smart meter question got me thinking about this. The technologies that we're talking about are really advanced, and they enable really cool, innovative stuff to happen on the grid. And I think if utility kind of doesn't move ahead or sticks with what they know, traditional investments, they might be left behind in terms of potentially worse reliability outcomes. They might be left with a system that is way more expensive than it needs to be. I think you'd find customers very angry about that, but you also might find their Wall Street investors angry about that too, depending on how it ends up. And so those are a few things, but I think the smart meter point just got me thinking about the really cool opportunity that utilities have to make this system much more advanced and sophisticated, while also reducing emissions and delivering better outcomes around equity and environmental justice.
Yeah, and just the other, the meters are a tool. They're not a silver bullet. How you use them is going to dictate whether they're useful in doing this and reducing our emissions or not. And that's the whole question, is like, they're now that they have been approved to install them. The question about how they're going to use them is still open. Exactly, third-party access to the meters. Can you write apps onto the meter that are available to everybody? The ability to monitor your own data at home. The meters will be able shouldn't be on, overdrawing that shouldn't be overdrawing, or even turn something off that shouldn't be on. And who has access to this information and ability to use it is critical. And the utility has, unsurprisingly, sought to expand its monopoly and to control everything about it, including your information on it. And so there's been a big push as well to say, like, that is not where your monopoly extends. You don't have the right to control all of these things. In fact, this needs to be an open market as well, with some guidelines, with some rules that are on it. So the enablement of our smart meters, I find it, I question whether we achieve our emission reductions without meters, but just having the meters doesn't mean that we will. Spot.
Tobacco industry side lawsuits plus even jail time will help.
And I do think,
We had time. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I need to wrap up.
you have gone way
The
over.
temperature's a little warm.
I think it's because it's been really interesting, great presentations. Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you. We can share our contact information.
Yeah.
now,
Okay.
so
Please
that
do.
Please,
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
I talk about this all the time.
And